But one thing that kind of struck me that kind of runs through your work is that it's about a dialogue and a conversation, either with an other who may appear in the film, or with another who doesn't, or an interior kind of conversation. And there's a kind of set of dichotomies or oppositions that are kind of set up that kind of create the dynamic or momentum that runs through the film. Would you say that that was something you're interested in, setting up those kind of oppositions and working them through?
I think looking at the second half, that there's this kind of remix going on of all these different emotional scenarios and conversations both with myself and with an other and with the absence of the other and loss. So there's these kind of strange, they're like rock and roll, but at the same time they're highly emotional. And they see, in the context of this festival, they seem to be like, you know, the nature of queer relationships, a kind of instability, a kind of intensity, a kind of strange trajectory through all kinds of moods and feelings and poetics, actually, with these aphorisms on top. You know, each film has its punchline aphorism, which is kind of, you know, which comes to terms with the tragedies or anything else that's kind of in the middle of all that.
I mean, I think we were all amused by some of your kind of lines, particularly my favourite is you can't dance at two weddings with one arse. And I also like you can bury me standing up, but don't mess up my hair.
Well, these are two rip-offs as well. One, you can't dance at two weddings with one arse, was Sarah Schulman.
Ah.
She said that in Cactus Babylon when I interviewed her. And then I've used that again and again.
I wondered if it was a kind of traditional Jewish saying.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's a Yiddish New York thing.
Yeah.
And Bury Me Standing But Don't Mess Up My Hair. Isabel von Secker wrote that book about the gypsies called Bury Me Standing. And I was just thinking about that. And I thought, yeah, bury me standing.
Yeah.
Don't mess up my hair. My clothes were all wrong.
I love that as well, yeah. But they do, they're incredibly witty. So how can we tell, watching your films, which is your writing? I mean, of course, it doesn't matter. But I suppose a better, more serious way of phrasing the question is, how do you collect the material that you use and re-quote, and how do you then structure that with your own, with your own, how you come up with your finished piece of writing that you use in the film?
Well, yeah, in recent work, I've really put together quotes. And I've acknowledged them all, and I put them in the credits at the end. In recent work, I've kind of mishmashed, I've processed all kinds of things until I come up with, it's poetry really. You kind of mash everything up until you get the kind of essence. So things come from other places, and some of them don't, or you add on to them. So, you know, like I was looking at 50-50 and Drive, she said, where it's very clear. It's kind of like actors, blah. Music, blah. And then the rest is me rapping over the top. And that's how it started early on. I used to look at the footage and the words would come into my head and I'd have a tape recorder and I'd come up with stuff.
In terms of the performances, there's a lot said these days about kind of performative identity, particularly around gender. But in Rootless Cosmopolitans, which was made now 20 years ago, you seem to be doing this in terms of Jewish identity. You're getting characters to perform various kinds of Jewish identity in a very kind of profound but kind of playful way. I suppose it's the film that kind of, sounds a bit crass, but got you noticed. It's the film that people associate with you from your kind of early period. How did you kind of come to make it?
Actually, there was a film before that called Tea Leaf, which I really don't want to ever see again. But that was the coming-of-age film. That was my graduate film, I think, at St. Martin's in '86. And after that, I thought, I want to make a film that's kind of French New Wave, that's kind of cool. But I thought, you know, guess what's missing from the avant-garde film scene? It's like, nobody talks about culture or context or identity, and I really wanted to talk about Jews, my culture, you know, in some cool and interesting way. And I think all those people, you know, there's the klutz, there's the really good-looking, cool kind of mommy, and the mad child, and the old lady and the Iranian, Persian, Jewish storyteller. I just thought, yeah, stick them all together, make a new wave film with Jews.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a brilliant way of describing it. And then you kind of take it a step further with Cheap Philosophy, which again, it's more of a send-up, isn't it? It's more of a satire, Cheap Philosophy.
Look, Cheap Philosophy should never have been a comedy. I was having a breakdown, and I thought the only person I could talk to is myself in performance. So I put on wigs and talked to the camera. Well, I wasn't talking to myself, I was talking to the camera. And it was like my first kind of engagement with the video, with the possibilities of video as a mirror. And I just thought, oh, I could be all these characters, and I could, have a cheap kind of therapy, cheap philosophy.
Dare I ask, did it work? It must have worked.
Well, it did.
You're here and you carried on filmmaking.
Everything that was meant to be so tragic in Cheap Philosophy was actually hilarious.
It's very funny. I want to the way you were talking about the mashup in terms of the way you do. You work with the audio track. What about putting the images together? How do you go about? I mean, there's some found footage in there. There's some acted stage. There's some kind of filmed material that looks a lot more kind of casual. How do you go about collecting all the imagery?
Yeah, that seems to be the way I've always worked. Now I look at it. Nowadays, I have a phone. I have this Kodak Share. I have my digital cameras that I don't really use very much. I kind of tend to use the low-res stuff, and actually I want to go back to Super 8 because I want that feel of celluloid. A lot of that stuff is processed post Super 8, and actually what really got me was the Twin Towers that came up in all those films, and it's like, oh my God, it's the Twin Towers. They're still there, but they're not.
No,
I was collecting footage on anything I had, Super 8, whatever camera I had, I would just collect footage, whether it was in bars and restaurants, and I still do the same thing. Moments of people talking, or myself, or anything. So it's part diary, part found footage, much more found footage now, because teaching mainstream cinema, or classic cinema, tend to kind of shoot stuff off the wall, projected, and throw that in, because it feels like want to re-edit these great moments from cinema and throw them all in together.
So, but in terms of your kind of editing practice, I mean, Rootless Cosmopolitans was 16mm, wasn't it? And you presumably, did you edit on Steenbeck?
Hang on a minute, hang on. Was it?
I don't know.
I think it was Super 8.
But did you edit?
Some of it was 16. I think most of it was Super 8 transferred to 16.
Yeah, and but you edited it manually, because I just kind of think, how does kind of going digital affect the editing process? Because your style of editing is so kind of quick. You use so much material, and if you collect so much, it must have made a huge difference actually when you
when I worked with neg cutters in the Soho studios, they used to go, "Blimey, love, your film's like minestrone." And it was, and I used to get so kind of shy and nervous about it. But actually I have the desire to cut things up. Actually, the thing I'm working on at the moment, I'm trying to kind of cut things up less. I don't know if I'll succeed. I don't know if that's maybe what I do is make minestrone out of perfectly good footage.